I found a journal in my apartment, and now I can't sleep. The U-Haul coughed and sputtered, finally surrendering to the incline of Oakhaven Avenue. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white against the worn plastic. Boston was supposed to be a fresh start, a clean break, away from David, away from the memories clinging to our old apartment like stubborn cobwebs. The building loomed into view, a hulking pre-war behemoth of red brick and ornate stonework. The Langdon, it declared in faded gold lettering above the entrance. It was beautiful in a decaying, almost Gothic way. Exactly the kind of place David would have hated, which I admitted to myself was part of the appeal. Unloading was a slog. Boxes filled with books, art supplies, and the remnants of a life I was trying to rebuild. The super, a gruff man named Mr. Henderson, mostly watched, offering the occasional grunt of encouragement that sounded suspiciously like a complaint. Finally, the last box was inside. My apartment. 4B was on the top floor. The climb up the creaking staircase left me breathless, but the view from the windows was worth it. A panorama of rooftops, church spires, and the distant shimmer of the Charles River. I spent the next few days unpacking, trying to transform the empty space into a home. The apartment had character. High ceilings, hardwood floors that groaned underfoot, and thick plaster walls that seemed to absorb sound. It felt solid, secure. It wasn't until late Wednesday that I found it. I was arranging my bookshelves, the familiar spines a comfort in the unfamiliar surroundings. One shelf was loose, wobbling precariously. I reached behind it, expecting to find a broken bracket or a missing screw. Instead, my fingers brushed against something solid, hidden behind the wall. I pulled the shelf away and discovered a small, rectangular compartment. It was dark, dusty, and clearly hadn't been opened in years. My heart pounded. This had to be good, like finding buried treasure. Inside the compartment was a single object, a leather-bound journal. The leather was cracked and worn, the color faded to a dull brown. There were no markings on the cover, no title, no indication of its contents. I hesitated for a moment, a strange sense of unease washing over me. It felt like I was trespassing, violating someone's privacy. But curiosity won out. I took the journal to the living room, settled into the worn armchair I'd inherited from my grandmother, and opened the cover. The first entry was dated July 14, 1987. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost clinical. Moved into 4B today. Place is a steal. A little rough around the edges, but the space is incredible. Oakhaven seems interesting. Lots of old buildings, lots of history. I think I'll like it here. The author identified himself as Jonathan. He wrote about his work as a historian, his fascination with the city's past, and his hopes for a quiet, productive life. The early entries were mundane, filled with details about his research, his daily routines, and his impressions of the neighborhood. I found myself drawn in, intrigued by his voice, his perspective. As I read on, however, the tone began to shift. August 2nd, 1987, keep hearing noises in the walls. Scratching, rustling, probably just mice. Need to call the super. August 15th, 1987, the noises are getting worse. It's not just mice. It sounds intentional, like something is trying to get out or get in. September 1st, 1987, I'm starting to feel unsettled. A sense of unease that I can't shake. It's like I'm being watched, even when I'm alone. The handwriting became more erratic, the sentences shorter, more fragmented. September 18th, 1987, shadows. I keep seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, but when I turn to look, there's nothing there. October 5th, 1987, dreams. Horrible dreams. I wake up screaming, covered in sweat. I can't remember what they are about, but the feeling of dread lingers for hours. October 22nd, 1987, it's in the walls. I know it is. I can feel it. It's listening, watching, waiting. I paused, a chill running down my spine. This was getting creepy. I told myself it was just a story, a product of someone's overactive imagination. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. I continued reading, drawn in by a morbid curiosity. November 9th, 1987, the whispers. I can hear them now. Faint, indistinct voices. They seem to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. They're saying my name. November 25th, 1987, I've tried to talk to Henderson about the noises, the shadows. He just shrugs, says it's an old building, things creak. He thinks I'm crazy. December 12th, 1987, it wants something. I don't know what it is, but it wants something from me. And I'm afraid to find out what. The last entry was dated December 28th, 1987. It was barely legible, a chaotic scrawl of ink and desperation. It's here. In the room. I can see it. It's behind the walls. It's coming for me. God help me, that was it. The journal ended abruptly with no explanation, no resolution. Just a chilling sense of dread and the lingering question of what happened to Jonathan. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. The apartment suddenly felt cold, oppressive. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, to take on a more sinister quality. I tried to dismiss it as just a story, a bit of harmless fiction. But as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I started hearing noises in the walls. Faint scratching, rustling. At first I dismissed them as the sounds of an old building settling, but they grew more frequent, more insistent. Then came the shadows, fleeting glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. And the dreams, vivid, disturbing nightmares that left me shaken and exhausted. I couldn't remember the details, but the feeling of terror lingered long after I woke up. I started documenting my experiences, writing them down in a notebook, just like Jonathan had done. It was a way to make sense of what was happening, to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. I knew I needed to find out more about Jonathan, about the history of the building. I started with the Oakhaven Public Library. Sarah Chen, the librarian, was a lifesaver. She was in her early 30s, with a sharp mind and a dry wit. I explained my situation, showing her the journal. "This is interesting," she said, her brow furrowed, "but it could be anything. A work of fiction, a hoax, the ramblings of a madman." "I know," I said, "but I need to know more. Can you help me?" Sarah agreed to help. She started digging through the library's archives, searching for information about the Langdon building and any mention of a Jonathan who might have lived there in the 1980s. The first thing we found was a series of newspaper articles about the building. It had been built in the early 1900s, during Oakhaven's heyday as a wealthy residential district. Over the years, it had housed a variety of tenants, from artists and writers to doctors and lawyers. Then we found something more disturbing. An article from December 1987 about the disappearance of a man named Jonathan Assuries from his apartment at the Langdon. The article mentioned that he was a historian and that he had been living in the building for only a few months. The case had never been solved. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was him, the author of the journal. Sarah continued her research, uncovering more details about the building's history. There were rumors of a suicide in the 1950s, a string of unexplained accidents in the 1970s. The building seemed to have a dark cloud hanging over it. One evening, as I was walking back to my apartment, I ran into Mrs. Petrov, an elderly woman who lived down the hall. She was frail and hunched over, but her eyes were sharp and knowing. "You're the new tenant in 4B, aren't you?" she said, her voice raspy. "Yes," I said. "Elias Thorne." "The Langdon has a hunger, dear," she said, her eyes fixed on mine. "Some things are better left undisturbed." She shuffled away, leaving me standing there, feeling cold and uneasy. The nightmares intensified. I started waking up screaming, convinced that something was in the room with me. I saw shadows moving in the corners of my eyes, heard whispers in the darkness. I was losing my grip on reality. I tried to talk to David about it, but he just dismissed my concerns. "You're just stressed out, Elias," he said. "You need to relax." But I couldn't relax. The feeling of dread was constant, overwhelming. One night, I woke up to a loud banging coming from inside the walls. It was deafening, relentless. I jumped out of bed and ran to the wall, pressing my ear against the plaster. I could hear scratching, clawing, the sound of something struggling to break free. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox and started smashing the wall. Plaster and drywall exploded outwards, revealing the wooden studs beneath. I kept hammering, driven by a blind, desperate need to stop the noise. Finally, I broke through. Behind the wall was a small, dark space. It was filled with dust and cobwebs, and in the center of the space I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a symbol, painted on the wall in what looked like blood, a twisted, grotesque shape that seemed to writhe and pulsate in the darkness. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what that symbol was. I had seen it in Jonathan's journal. He had drawn it in his final entry, calling it a ward against the evil that was pursuing him, but it hadn't worked. I ran out of the apartment screaming and didn't stop until I reached the street. I called Sarah, my voice shaking. "It's real, Sarah," I said. "It's all real. The journal, the noises, the shadows, it's all real." She told me to calm down, to come to the library. She would meet me there. When I arrived, Sarah was waiting for me along with Detective Miller, a seasoned police officer with a weary expression. I told them everything, showing them the journal, the symbol on the wall. Detective Miller listened patiently, but he was clearly skeptical. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "I understand you're going through a difficult time, but this sounds like a case of overactive imagination. Maybe you need to see a doctor." "I'm not crazy," I shouted. "This is happening, you have to believe me," Miller sighed. "I'll take a look at your apartment," he said, "but I can't promise anything." He and Sarah followed me back to the Langdon. When we entered my apartment, Miller's expression hardened. The hole in the wall, the blood-red symbol, the oppressive atmosphere, it was all too real to ignore. He started an official investigation, questioning Mrs. Petrov, Mr. Henderson, and other tenants in the building. He found nothing conclusive, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I couldn't stay in the apartment. I checked into a motel, haunted by nightmares and visions. I was convinced that whatever had driven Jonathan to madness was now after me. One day, while Miller was searching my apartment, he found something I hadn't noticed before, a loose floorboard in the bedroom. He pried it up and discovered another hidden compartment. Inside was a small wooden box. He opened the box and found a collection of strange objects, dried herbs, animal bones, and a small silver amulet engraved with the same grotesque symbol I had seen on the wall. Miller showed me the box. "Do you recognize any of this, Mr. Thorne?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I've never seen it before." Sarah spoke up. "This looks like ritualistic objects," she said, her voice hushed, "like something used in a pagan ceremony." Miller continued his investigation, uncovering more and more evidence of strange rituals and occult practices connected to the Langdon building. It seemed that the building had a long history of attracting dark forces. The climax came on a stormy night. I was back in my motel room, tossing and turning in my sleep. Suddenly, I woke up to a feeling of intense dread. I felt like I was being suffocated, crushed by an unseen force. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. Then I saw it, a dark, shapeless mass hovering above me. It was featureless, but I could feel its malevolence, its hunger. It was the entity that had haunted Jonathan, the thing that lived in the walls, and now it was here in my room, ready to claim me. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable, but then I heard a voice. A faint, distant whisper. "Leave him alone," it said. "He's not the one you want." The dark mass hesitated, then slowly retreated. The feeling of dread began to fade. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath. The room was empty. I didn't know who had spoken or what had driven the entity away, but I knew that I had been given a second chance. I called Miller and Sarah, telling them what had happened. They rushed to my motel room, their faces etched with concern. "We have to get you out of here, Elias," Sarah said. "This building is not safe." I agreed. I couldn't stay in Boston any longer. I packed my belongings, sold my car, and bought a one-way ticket to anywhere. I left the Langdon building behind, but I knew that I would never truly escape the memories of what had happened there. I don't know what happened to Jonathan or what fate awaits the Langdon building. All I know is that I survived. But at what cost? I still have nightmares. I still see shadows in the corners of my eyes, and I still hear whispers in the darkness. I often wonder if the entity is still out there, waiting for me, or if it has found a new victim, a new resident of the Langdon building. Maybe someone like the young woman I saw moving in as I was leaving. She smiled at me, a polite, almost vacant smile. But something in her eyes, it sent a shiver down my spine. She was carrying a box filled with books, and on top of the box I saw something familiar, a leather-bound journal. I didn't say anything. I just kept walking. Let someone else discover the secrets hidden within those pages. Let someone else grapple with the darkness that lurks within the walls. I'm done. I'm free, or am I? I can't sleep.